Hello, everyone. It's just going to be me for today, and I'll probably be quite a bit shorter than usual. But this is the Jordan B. Peterson Community Podcast, where we usually discuss the different uh, lectures and uh, videos by Jordan B. Peterson. What we do is every weekend we'll go go through the biblical lecture series and discuss those together, and then these podcasts are kind of a formulation of all of our discussions into something more coherent, usually. And as today is the or just so you know, at the end of this week, we're going to be discussing 12 Rules for Life. Hey, Sumit.
Hey John, are you able to hear me correctly?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Cool, cool. Sorry for the delay. And I have listened to the lecture before, but I have not listened to it this week. So I'll let you take the lead.
Okay, great.
Actually, I've been more worried about reality than philosophy right now. I mean, stuff
Yeah.
is happening here.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, I was hearing about it in the group. Okay, so yeah, if anybody that's listening would like to discuss the 12 Rules for Life, we're going to be talking all about that this upcoming weekend, and then we'll share our main points and takeaways during this podcast as well. So you can find us at jordanbpeterson.community, and that has all the links to the different stuff that you can get from us. As I didn't have any real notes for while making this while watching the lecture. I guess that kind of puts it. Well, I did have one kind of interesting takeaway. Because at the beginning of the first half of the lecture, he kind of goes into all of the previous material that he's worked with, and I find it very interesting how, at least from my perspective, he's one of the first people I've been introduced to that have looked at the Bible not as a historical document as most people do, but as a I don't know, almost he takes more of the perspective of it as a fictional work, in that it all kind of makes sense together, which it definitely does. You can see the kind of narrative within it, and but he's I don't know. I just find it very interesting how that kind of shift in perspective really makes it seem more important, at least for myself, because I don't know. It instead of it being like a catalog of events that have occurred, it's a formulated catalog of events that kind of go towards this ultimate ending point, and all of the different things prior to it can seem quite a bit like foreshadowing. It's very interesting, and I don't know. At least for myself, it's been something that has really helped me in looking at the Bible with fresh eyes. It's pretty cool.
are you saying people literally read this stuff?
Oh yeah, yeah. Like, uh, in Christianity, it's their foundation text. I mean, most people probably don't read it for themselves, but those that are invested into it, uh, for sure, they'll read their Bibles on their own all the time. Um, and I don't know, when reading it with this kind of perspective, like that's what I'm doing currently, is going through it all over again. But now, kind of looking at it more as a formulated document. It makes a lot more sense. Like if you look at there's this YouTube channel called The Logos Made Flesh. He has this really interesting perspective on the book of John, where once you kind of look at it, within the book of John, there is a there's like a recurring theme of water. And so there's like this symbol of water that is used over and over and over again in the book of John, like every single chapter, even though when written, it wouldn't have its chapter marks. But, and each chapter kind of brings in a new facet to that image of water and like what it's supposed to mean and what it's representing. And if you kind of look at the other books of the Bible, or even the Bible as a whole, and seeing where there's certain images that are being used that are constantly being used over and over again in different ways, it makes it for a more interesting full story. And of course, it, as like being raised with the assumption that the entire Bible was written purely as a historical document, then it does raise questions about to the validity of the historicity of the biblical events. And it's not like the Bible is written in a way that it's easy to see it as being made up, because there's a lot to the Bible that is almost, it's too boring to be a fictional document, because like the whole book of Numbers, it's basically just counting how many people they had in the land in the time of Moses. It's like it's not it's not in the same way as Genesis, where these are like legendary stories of the patriarchs for these people that could be highlighted and exaggerated. And like there's this side book called Jasher that it is the same stories in Genesis, but they're like ramped up even more so than in Genesis, where like each figure in the lineage of Jacob is basically like a superhero. Each one has kind of their own superpower that they have, that it's very much one of those like legendary stories that people would tell each other. And there's a lot to the Bible that is like that. It has that exaggerated.
John, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry.
I don't know why, but you seem to be breaking up. Or is it just me? I just can't tell because there's no one else on the call.
Maybe. I'm not sure exactly if it's me or you. It could be me.
I mean, to say your voice keeps breaking.
Oh, okay. It's probably me. Let's see if I can lower the bandwidth usage, even though I'm not using video. Is that better or worse? It might be like test. Can you hear me?
Okay, so just to figure out if it's me or not, I'll drop out and join via different device.
Oh, okay. So we'll figure that out, I guess. All right. Anyway, I was just saying how there's certain aspects to the Bible that definitely have that very exaggerated story-like quality, especially if you look at the extra biblical things such as the book of Jasher. That's basically entirely based upon it seems like the stories that the people of the time would tell about their legendary lineage and like all of the cool things that they did. But as I was saying, there's still like actually reading through the Bible, there's a lot to it that is too boring to be made up, or at least I don't know. It could be that I don't I don't know. It it's too up in the air to really say whether or not the stories happened literally, especially the more farcical ones or the more extravagant ones. But there's still a lot that has been, I don't know, built. It has been like the foundation to an entire culture, the Jewish culture, that is seemingly pretty steadfast in their tradition, to the point where there's a lot to there. It's easy to assume that there was something prior to that had led them to get to this point. And you can also like look to the historicity of Jesus Christ, and a lot of historians have kind of come to some sort of conclusion that, based off of the widespread or the based off of the impact of Christianity, you can tell that there was some sort of there must have been some sort of figure that at least the people at the time believed to be true in what was going on with them, because there were people constantly dying for their beliefs, which is, and they're the people that were the ones that basically started the religion of Christianity. So anyway, I just found it interesting that there's two very differing perspectives for the biblical texts, and I'm really enjoying his perspective on it, and it's making me be able to see the Bible in a more connected fashion than you if you were to just look at it as if it were historical documents. Because that's basically how I was raised, is to read it as if it was the historical documents. Of course, having some sort of aspect that's still relevant, but I don't know. It seems much more relevant now if when reading it through the metaphorical lens of almost like reading Dostoevsky or uh, other great works. That there's these archetypal aspects to it that are relevant within everyone's day-to-day lives, or not day-to-day, but their entire lives, and like their monumental choices that they'll go through. Oh, Sumit's not in here. I was like waiting for him to say something. All right, so you're back.
It must have been my Mac, I think. Now I can hear you very clearly.
Okay, great. So I was considering what it means to wrestle with God, in I suppose the metaphorical sense, not necessarily any physical sense, because that doesn't make much sense. Um, and I see it pretty prominent within the Jewish culture, how they're able to be very secular, but also, I don't know, maybe through their relaxed, almost atheistic aspect to themselves, they're able to I don't know. I listened to the interview with Eric Weinstein on the Sam Harris podcast, and his viewpoint on religion is quite interesting. And like he'll talk about how he's an atheist on every day except for Sabbath, which is kind of funny. But and you can like question the validity to his Sabbath keeping and how non-atheistic he is, but it doesn't really matter exactly because, well, I mean that at least the example of him seems pretty close to wrestling with God, and in the metaphorical sense, you can see how Peterson is too, with how he'll kind of dodge the question or behave in a certain way without actually knowing if he believes, or I mean, I'm sure he probably believes fully, but he's probably unwilling to, or not really unwilling, but not wanting to share the extent to his beliefs, because for him that seems to be a very personal thing, which I can respect that. And like for myself, I listen to a lot of different debates between like atheists and theists, and find them quite fascinating. I mean, a lot of the times you'll get some of the same arguments over and over again, but it's still interesting to me to ponder both sides without, and I kind of feel like that's where I am currently, because I don't know, there's two different ways I can go about it, and I don't necessarily want to limit myself to either of those two just yet. How about yourself?
Well, I'm very clear on this. I mean, uh, because I was raised in mainly like Hindu culture, but I just cannot relate to it. I don't even celebrate their festivals. They come and go. I really don't care uh, about that all that. So to me, it's like to me, it's not like I have got some secret religion going on that uh, I'm not like willing to openly talk about. But I've seen other people in my country who kind of pretend to be great enlightened liberals, but at the same time they have these beliefs that are kind of not matching with that, and I I for I just cannot understand how can that be. Uh, how can those two things exist at the same time? Like, do you suspend your logic and let's just say, let me put it this way: you would find in India a lot of people work in the tech industry, right? And like it takes a lot of logical thinking and all analysis and all that to just to do your job, and to do it well would take even more, and but at the same time these people seem to have all these beliefs which I consider to be irrational, really. So I don't understand how those two things can be inside the same person.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to look at how people are able to have these kind of completely polar opposite trains of thought, depending upon what they're doing. Like, and
Just so that nobody misunderstands,
uh-huh,
I'm not saying they have these opposite thoughts as a means of having an argument, or as a means of playing devil's advocate, or just talking about ideas, because we do that all the time,
uh-huh,
right? They actually execute those beliefs like they are their beliefs.
mm-hmm, yeah, and it makes you like question just how rational people can become, because like I listened to Sam Harris, and that that's his kind of goal, is to get everyone to be perfectly reasonable and rational in how they live their everyday lives. But I don't know if that we're exactly capable of that. I'm sure some people are, as you can like definitely see from a lot of different people. But it seems like there's something that people gravitate towards the irrational, just to have that kind of allure, or that mystical aspect to what they're doing, to I guess find some sort of purpose in it. And it's like, you'll, depending upon your options, you're going to go for the most likely option within maybe your culture or within your own interests. Like, there's people that will go into Scientology and will benefit from it for a while. I mean, it's eating away at their wallets quite a bit, but at least at first it seems like people definitely get a lot out of it, and find some sort of meaning within it. Because you can be as rational as you can, but if you don't have some sort of philosophy for your everyday life that isn't exactly based on rationality, well, okay, there are philosophies and ways of thinking that are based on rationality, but I'm not sure if that fulfills the meaning within people. Well, I'd say ideologies definitely can fulfill meaning within people, because it brings them into a part of something. I was listening to Jürgen Brook and his objectivist podcast, and I have ties to objectivism because that was kind of my introduction to philosophy, and then outwards from there, Peterson and everything else. And that's definitely a philosophy based upon rationality, but there's still that aspect to it that contains the irrational in a kind of way, that in the case that it's based upon something that you can't necessarily prove exists. Like, I don't think you can prove either way whether free will exists or not, unless you have like both opposites and then compare. Well, I don't know. There are cases where people are definitely inhibited in their ability to execute their free will based off of like tumors, but that's usually used by the determinists to prove their theory on it's like that, but for everybody in some sort of capacity. Anyway, I don't. In the same way as like the atheist and theist arguments, I enjoy both sides of those, and I'm still kind of unsure whether or not it's worth picking a side, just because it seems like both of them kind of end up with the same types of results, where you're morally responsible for your actions, and you have, even if it's an illusion of free will, I mean, but our entire life is kind of based upon the illusion of being the center of the universe. Like, within your own perspective, that's what you are. So, I mean, that's how we're able to live our lives, is by having that illusion of being everything that happens to us is directly related to us. Otherwise, then I don't know, I'd imagine live a kind of short life where, I mean, you have to have that self-interested aspect where you that kind of objectivist aspect to yourself, where you're working towards yourself in whatever you can do. But I don't know. This isn't exactly the topic for any of these subjects.
Couple of things come to my mind. First one would be, remember how I've been saying I'm really more interested in reality than philosophy, John.
Hmm.
The reason for that is that there is this idea that hey, you don't need anything except for food, water, and shelter and all that, just basic stuff.
Hmm.
So no, I obviously can't prove it because everyone, not everyone, but we run into all these people who are seeking meaning and everything. And I have been thinking maybe it's just the invention of the modern culture that you need meaning. Because why do we want to change the world? Because we have people like Jobs, Musk, and all these guys who have changed the world, and we kind of are influenced by that. So I'm not sure how this meaning. Uh, it could just be something we made up, right? The modern society made up because uh, I would see because earlier Peterson have been saying that you want to take this family business seriously because you'll be 40 and then you will not have a family and then you will regret it. And I
Hmm.
really have been seriously thinking about that idea, and I think as far as I'm concerned, he's exactly right. So, and I've been thinking about marriage and all that, and I realized once you get married, like your family is kind of your meaning.
Hmm.
Uh, so, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I would say for most of the history, I would say for most of the people, I'm guessing it. I guess that your family and your community, that's your meaning. Just dealing with reality and trying to feed them and trying to do that. So I think this whole other meaning stuff that you talk about, it's kind of a luxury that a lot of people don't have. Uh, because you need certain kind of uh, you know uh, s- like if you're just trying to go out there survive and everything, then you probably won't be thinking about higher meaning. It's just luxury that you have. I wouldn't necessarily. I don't know why they keep on talking about meaning. You need meaning to uh, uh, be alive and stuff like that. Because to me, that only comes up when the struggle of life goes away. Because when there is struggle, you are just struggling. You are just trying to get out of that thing. Uh, so that's that. So do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I agree with you. There's kind of the notion of going out and changing the world to kind of gain your meaning from it, from life. But as you were saying, there's people that I'd say most people get their meaning from their community and through their family. Like there's this clip of Mike Tyson. He has like all his belts that he's won on his table, and he's talking about how today those belts mean nothing to him. When he was younger, they meant everything to him. But now that he has his kids, they're his entire world now, and that they're everything that he values and everything he kind of works for now. And it's interesting to see how, depending on your age, your where you get meaning from changes. There's this quote by Shakespeare in one of his plays. I'm not sure which one. That every man plays his role: child, uh, adult, father. It kind of goes through the epochs of a man's life, and seems like in between or during each kind of place in a person's life, they're going to have a different value system and or a different highest value that they're working towards. And it's interesting to see when that changes and that people become different from who they were previously. It's interesting.
The one service that Peterson is doing that I really am now beginning to see, John,
What's that?
is that people are not necessarily told that this would happen in their future. Like
when I was growing up, I was like listening to all this popular media stuff about changing the world and having your dreams and following them and all this glorification stuff, right? So I was like, cool, man, that's what I want to do. Uh, and it sounds obvious, I guess. That, I mean, I must be dumb that I didn't realize it, because it sounds obvious. I would say it would sound obvious to so many people, but it's just that I didn't realize I'm supposed to also get married at some point and have a family. Like, I was like, oh man, I'll be, chasing my dreams, I'll be doing this, I'll be doing that. And it didn't occur to me that that transition will occur. And uh, it was only like much later when Peterson started talking about this, I was like taken aback by it. And I didn't know that transition will happen, John. And the reason that is so important is that if you had someone who could guide you and tell you this stuff beforehand, then you could prepare for it. And there are things that, John, I would have done so differently if I had known that this was going to happen. Because you have to understand, women necessarily don't need to prepare for marriage, but we as men do, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Because it is so competitive. So there are things that I would have, paid more attention to, made better and everything, if I had known, which I didn't. It just came as a surprise to me. And I think he's doing the same for a lot of other people as well. Like there wasn't in anyone who in their life who's talking about this. I can totally see that he must be doing that for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's the cool thing is he's putting the emphasis back into family, and like instead of like seeking outwards the I don't know the glory of the world, he brings it down to a very small scale thing that you can work up from, cleaning your room and then moving outwards from there to cleaning your house, and then that means to like make your house in order into a place that you want it to become, and that includes like making your personal lifestyle exactly the one you want it to be. And so yeah, that's something also that I have tapping at my door, that same knowledge or that same understanding that upcoming there will be a time for when I need to get married as well. And it's I don't know. I see how necessary it is to have that second aspect to yourself that you're. I hear it related all the time that it's something that you're like that you were previously missing, and that then after you get married, you have a more fuller side to yourself. That, and then from there you can have children, and then kind of grow out um, further sides to yourself, which is interesting.
What's dangerous is that a lot of popular culture that I was exposed to, uh, it seemed that getting married and having children and all this shit was kind of looked down upon.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's doing disservice to the people, not exposing them to the other side.
Yeah, that it's interesting because I actually just was writing a letter the other day to a fellow uh, screenwriter. I don't know if he's going to respond or anything, but it came to this kind of interesting dilemma where it seems to me most artists are quite usually creating art based off of their own experience and their own desires, and I see how that is a problem because it's going to be specific to their personal personality type, and it's kind of like this creative outflow for themselves. It's very egotistical and narcissistic that and this is speaking of myself. Most of my work is upon reflection completely about myself and like the dilemmas I'm going through. of course, done in a way that seems interesting within like some sort of fictional world. But it makes me worried that the only creative output that is out there for people to glean from is based upon a certain personality type that, and I don't know how relevant or valuable it would be to people of different value sets. Like, it's weird. I used to work at a job that was very blue collar, and like everyone besides myself was, I don't know, felt very much the salt of the earth. Like there was this time where people were asked to like give their hobbies, and like of the 15 people there, all 15 besides myself said hunting and fishing. And there's a whole side of humanity that is just kind of forgotten within the popular culture, and they're very much the cornerstones to the society we live in that are just kind of forgotten and slandered a lot of the times within the popular culture.
Yeah, and it's very irresponsible thing to do. I mean, it's there is going to be a lot of collateral damage here, man. There great plans to turn the whole world upside down. I mean, you would find me, and you'd find a lot of other people who were kind of on the other side before Peterson showed up.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're like, crap, all that stuff. Man, there's this other side to it. The second thing I wanted to bring up, John, is I think uh, my idea of rationality is different from your or maybe Sam Harris's. So the way, as I understand your, I don't know if that's your perspective or not. Just to me, rationality, when people say that, I think what it means is you take all the inputs, you think about them logically, and then you come to some kind of a solution, and then you apply that solution, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So is that rationality?
Yeah, I'd say that's probably rationality. The thing is, most people don't, myself included, take the time to consider their actions and everything that they're doing and everything that they're kind of observing, and to try to formulate it into some sort of coherent overall theory that they have with everything. And so that's why you'll have the people that are like able to be very structured in their job and be able to think completely focused on everything else very rationally and logically. And then afterwards they have this kind of, they have these beliefs that seem ridiculous. And I think that there's kind of this dilemma where if you put yourself into a specific category so fully, then it kind of creates a vacuum in the opposing aspect that you still need filled somehow. And so, like, for Sam Harris, yeah, he gets his meaning, I think, from attempting to change the world, and by like changing society and culture through his books and through his discussions that he has with people on what he does. But for a lot of people, they don't have that same capability of getting that meaning from something. That's the thing. We're very social people that require some sort of feeling of being part of a larger picture. And I can see Sam Harris, he definitely gets that from doing what he does. But a lot of people, they have to get it from, say, having a family or from being part of the community or whatever community that is. I think there's kind of this aspect to ourselves that isn't fully there until we are part of something larger, or we create something larger within our own heads, and then kind of grasp onto that, because that was the thing that we were missing.
Actually, the thing is, you cannot be rational, uh, because you just don't have all the information to kind of process it and come to a kind of a logical conclusion. You just don't know everything, and you would not to need to know everything. And even if you knew everything, you would need to then be able to process all that data. I doubt if your brain could do that, John. And so I think we rely upon these underlying systems, right, that have evolved for like these millions of years, right? So, and to rely upon them is somehow considered irrational, and I'm not sure it should be, John, because just today I was talking to someone, and the conversation was continuing, and based on based on how he was responding, I was figuring out how much I can share with him, how much I can't. And that's just the way we deal with people. We figure out whom to trust, whom not to trust. And if you ask somebody, I was just having this conversation with someone, and now I came I totally realized that this is the kind of person that I can deal with and do business with. And now you might say, okay, did I come to that conclusion rationally? No. I don't even know like which algorithm I used, John. I just kept listening to him, kept monitoring what he was saying and everything, and he seems to have the correct value system. So we have got this. What I'm trying to say is, you might say that that's irrational because I cannot explain it to you, cannot quite articulate it, but it's kind of inbuilt into our system for like these millions of years. And uh, I feel that people pay too much emphasis on this thing, rationality, rather than just trusting their kind of body and their brain to kind of uh, just figure out what is the right thing. I mean, that happens all the time when you're dealing with humans. You get this sense that there is something wrong with this person. Now that can be wrong. I think you can hone this skill over time, but I wouldn't call that rational, John, because it's kind of a complex machine you have, that is your brain, and you don't understand everything that is going inside it. And it may very well have some like very valid reasons for giving you that input that you can't trust this person, even though it cannot quite tell you why. And that is somehow irrational, but to me that's intelligent.
I I don't think even like the rationalists will say that they're fully rational, but it seems like within our limited capacities, rationalism is doing exactly what you were saying, of like taking in all the facts and using logic to come to a conclusion. But for like whenever you're a part of one field, then you kind of have to almost take it on faith that some authority figure in another field has more information than you do, and will and you kind of take what their conclusions have been, assuming that they have also been thinking rationally on something, and then kind of moving on from there. But just as you were saying, when dealing with the day-to-day instances, you're not using your rational mind at all. I mean, you can be taking in information that you've learned rationally and then implementing it kind of unconsciously within your actions, but it I don't think you would be able to be very effective if you had to think rationally about everything, every single aspect to yourself that you would do. And that's probably how people are able to kind of get into the specific religions or irrational behavior that they have, so maybe superstitious, because that's just easy. That's essentially the same thing as what people in a specific field are having to rely upon the authority figures in another field in order to kind of get their information. That's that level of irrationality, but to a more, instead of putting the thinking onto somebody else in another scientific field, they're putting their kind of thinking onto their priest or their preacher or on God himself, or just something outside of our own capacity. I don't know. Anyway, I actually have things I need to get done today, and so considering neither of us really have notes for the actual lecture, I don't think we'll be able to get very.
I got a question for you.
Uh-huh.
Why would you want to why would you want to wrestle with God? I mean, what the hell? I mean, earlier we had all these characters who were dealing with reality, and they had this belief, and they were just trying to do the right thing. They were dealing with their own limitations, right?
Uh-huh.
That's what we have seen so far. And they were going on these adventure trips, and bad things were happening, and God was kind of assisting them along and everything. So yeah, so far we had that. So but now, why in your right mind would you be wrestling with God? Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
And like, who would have the audacity to like mess with God? I wouldn't mess with him, even if like I'm not a religious person. If God was there, like I hypothetically wouldn't mess with someone like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's see. I don't think that Jacob is the only instance of somebody wrestling with God. I recently read Fear and Trembling by Soren Kierkegaard, and it kind of discusses how important the story of Abraham and Isaac is, because and he kind of does it in a way by describing exactly what it's not first. Like, this isn't a test to prove God's existence, because Abraham already knew God existed because he gave Isaac to him. This isn't exactly a test to find out how, well, it's a very complicated story, and I don't think Peterson actually gave it the fullest extent that it required. But I mean, to give it the fullest extent it required would take probably a whole nother lecture series. But I really enjoyed that book, and it seems to be that there's a case in the case of Abraham and Isaac. Kierkegaard kind of makes the point that it's an instance of the individual kind of placing himself in the authority of the infinite. So that in this case being God, where it's not him. I don't think I can even explain it. Just I probably would have to reread it again, because I usually get a much fuller understanding of a book after I've having read it. So I'd probably have to read it again to fully understand. So you're questioning, what does it mean to wrestle with God?
And what kind of motivations What does it mean to wrestle with God, and what kind of weird motivation would you have to even try something like that, man? What the hell?
Yeah. Well, it seems strange that God would want to create a being that would be capable of wrestling with him. I think it's kind of more of a introduction. No, not an introduction, but it's kind of shining more of the light on the personality of a God that would create beings that are capable of wrestling with and denying the existence of or anything like that. In that he would want to create beings that are capable of resisting him. That's a weird thing, and I think you can kind of draw a comparison in raising children, because if you're raising a child properly, they're not going to be somebody that is your automaton, your basically the the slave to you. You're kind of creating somebody that will be able to become better than you in a certain way. And that's not to say that that's God's intention, but he seems to delight in those instances where that occurs. Where there's this. Okay, that's not quite accurate, because there's many instances where man tries to place himself above God, such as in the Tower of Babel, or in the case of Moses when he hits the rock to beget water for the people instead of speaking to the rock as God commanded him to do. But it seems like by resist. Okay, wrestling with God. What does that mean? See, there's so many different ways that you can probably take it. Because, like, in the case of Jacob, it's written in a way that feels very literal. So it's like some sort of other entity is there that Jacob wrestles with until he gets his blessing. But how can that be placed into a metaphorical realm where we can actually glean from it something?
I have not watched the lectures. I just thought they this would be an interesting question to ask, because I that's like uh, kind of the first thing that, like, sometimes you're taken aback by something.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what it was.
Yeah, and I probably should watch the lecture again, because if he has some sort of answer to that, that would be quite useful. But as I recall, at least I'm not getting any memory of any kind of clear point as to what that means, other than kind of this. For my own life, I can see it as kind of in the same way. Case of Eric Weinstein, wrestling with the idea of God is one aspect that we do so with, because like we're continually making the world more known. So we're like uncovering all these things that we don't know and turning them things into things that we do know. That's kind of, in a way, taking away from not the illusion, the mighty aspect of God. Because, like, for the people in the time of the Bible, that their entire universe was based upon things that they don't know. And over the time of, and it's seemingly through the Catholic Church, science was continually bringing, well, it's not even just Catholic Church. it's a continual all throughout the religions. It's almost in a way taking away from the mysterious, what is it, the mysterium tremendum aspect of God, which is the like mysterious unknown, and taking away from it and turning it into something that we can now use to prove his non-existence.
Hey John, that's what was going on. Like we were struggling with the unknown and the infinite, and we are limited beings, and that causes suffering. That rhetoric was going on and on since the beginning of the thing. So
Yeah.
I don't see why he would like uh, turn that into wrestling with God. I uh,
Well, I think that's at least an aspect to what's happening between. Okay, if Jacob is kind of a archetypal figure for all of humanity, then that's kind of exactly what happens with who we are. We're like by nature trying to beat the infinite, trying to break down the infinite into something that is now part of ourselves. And that kind of brings it back to how the infinite seems to smile upon that in a way, because, or at least I can't help but feel like that's the purpose to the universe, is to have that the conscious beings capable of doing so.
I'll respond to that, but before that, I have two ideas to just throw in.
Uh-huh.
First, one would be, it could be something like this. Let's just say you are some kind of marine or something, and you don't leave any man behind. That's your value system.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow this God character says that's not cool with me, so I'll say fuck you, God. I'm doing the right thing. So it could be a clash of value system between what God thinks and what we think. We trying to come up with our own value system, and so I'm not sure if it is that. I'm just guessing, uh, or it could be. I don't think it's the later, because the later is um, even Cain tried to wrestle with God in a way, because he declared war against the
Mm-hmm.
existence itself, like Peterson says.
Mm-hmm.
uh, so you might be unhappy with the universe he created, so you are like uh, but I don't see how then you would be wrestling with God. uh, with that, I mean, where do you find God? At least in the value system, uh, there seems to be kind of a default value system kind of universe has the way things go, and you got now your own. So then you'll be constantly wrestling with reality. uh, Now, to talk about your original idea of dealing with the infinity, so God has all these attributes. They say he knows everything, he's infinite and everything. But I'm not sure if you can say if uh, you are struggling with infinity, you are actually struggling with God. I might say you're struggling with reality itself.
Hmm.
Or I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is, uh, God is this complex thing. I don't even know what it is. So if you are struggling with infinity, and we know God is infinite, uh, if I'm struggling with infinity, can I say I'm struggling with God, or can't I say it?
I think you can, because there's kind of this phrasing that's used, the God of the gaps, which is just like everything that we don't know, people kind of place God into as being, oh, we don't know exactly how life came to be, like first came to be out of dead matter. God created life. We don't know how the Big Bang started, so God created the Big Bang, and that's and like all throughout history, we don't know how humans were made and animals were made. So God created humans and animals, and it's a continual aspect of like what was once in the place of God, now man kind of creates some sort of alternate understanding of it. And that's in a way man being egotistical enough to understand the 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 inner workings of the universe. I think that's actually a pseudo quote from the book of Job. Something like that. That God gets mad at Job for I don't know. Sorry.
No, he gets mad at Joe for what?
For assuming that he knows better than God himself. I think Job is another archetypal story of wrestling with God. And it's one where Job also gets blessed at the end because of it. It's a very strange story.
Here is the thing about this. I totally agree with you. This God thing. We tend to say, "Hey, God must have done it," and then some guy has to stand up and say, "You know what? I'm not too sure about this God character. I'm going to figure out why this is happening." Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense to me. That we continually explore things and try to understand them. And you see, John, not everybody does that. uh, I some special kind of character comes in and he doesn't agree with like what everyone is saying, and he says no, I will find out. I don't think it's that. I don't think it is. Right, the dissenter. So dissenter would certainly struggle against this thing by the very nature itself, that it's unknown and he's trying to discover it. So
Mm-hmm.
that's fine, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, in order for him to really struggle against God, there needs to be some resistance to what he's doing from God. That's the only way he can struggle with God. uh, and if you say that now if you try to discover things that are unknown, you will automatically encounter resistance because they are unknown and you are trying to discover them. And but uh, uh, so you have to describe that resistance as kind of resistance against like God resisting you from discovering that. But uh, that's kind of inbuilt into reality itself. When you're trying to discover unknown things,
Uh-huh.
bad things can happen. So uh, and so far nobody talked about God resisting us. So uh, I guess the answer to everything we are looking for is found in this resistance thing. Like this guy is struggling with God, so like God must be opposing him in some way. So now what is that opposition? Like how does that manifest?
Hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting how the reality itself tends to resist against it becoming known, or resist against man attempting to conquer it. And then if so inclined, you could place that archetypal truth, that of reality resisting against you, as under the banner of God resisting against you. And that's not necessarily the figure of God himself, but the same. It's almost like the same neurological pattern of as if you're resisting against the infinite, because yeah, it's you resisting against the unknown and the unknown resisting against you attempting to conquer it. That's really interesting. Anyway, I actually have to head off though. So, um,
All right.
yeah,
I guess I'm out of ideas, man.
okay, yeah,
Something
it's a
interesting happened today, by the way.
oh yeah,
Yeah. So I met this super nerd who works in the tech sector in India. Okay, and
Hmm.
I just on some official business. So, and then we started talking about things in general. And as it turns out, he knows about Sam Harris and everything. And then I asked him, "Do you know about intellectual dark web?" And he's like, "What is that?" He was so excited about it, and he's an atheist.
Uh-huh.
So I sent him a link, a link to the first biblical lecture. So let's see what happens if how would he react if he watches it.
I think that
Hmm.
that first lecture in the series is quite useful in at least getting a better understanding of what the character of God could be used as. And
Hmm.
it's interesting to think of God as kind of a, I'm going to say social construct, but I'm using it in the same sense that basically our entire world is based upon these social constructs that we all kind of hold to be true within its own right, such as like language is technically a social construct, and numbers are a social construct, and mathematics. And these are all like social constructs, and it's interesting to think of God in that sense, that it's something that we're not exactly capable of proving at all, and it doesn't even exist perhaps, uh, but it's still useful to have. Like numbers don't exist; they're something that we use in order to get something. Or so it could be that our brains have evolved into a point where we kind of require, or we're a more useful person when we have that kind of social construct to kind of place everything that we don't know underneath. Like, okay, now that makes sense because we have some sort of box that we can place the strangeness into.
I have a bunch of things to say about that, but if we do, you'll not be able to leave it. So,
No, go ahead.
uh, okay, this was my last message to people. So I guess I got two things to talk about. So
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to fuck with like this evolution business, man. You just don't want to fuck with it. I just realized it today. You want to seriously think about having a family and all that, and there are going to be some people who can go without that, like people who are crazy after some kind of enlightened goal.
Mm-hmm.
But most of us might not be that, right? So you really want to be careful about what you do. uh, so that's one of the things, because I had this crazy plan to go somewhere and do something, and uh, okay, here is what I wanted to do. I wanted to go, like, you remember the book Walden?
Yeah, I haven't read it yet though, but I understand what it's about.
Yeah, so I wanted to go somewhere like forever and just read books and learn things and everything, and leave everything. I mean, like, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. And then friend of mine comes along and he says, "Hey, you idiot! Why don't you try this idea for a month and then see whether you want to do it for the rest of your life or not?" And I was like, "Fuck!" Uh, like, rather than drop everything, just take a vacation, go and try it out. And I was like, "That makes so much sense. I I would have done something crazy, man. This it makes so much sense." So before you do anything crazy, just do a small experiment, figure it out,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and you just don't want to by default assume these traditional things about family and deriving meaning from that are a bunch of bullshit. Just don't want to do that by default.
Mm-hmm.
It you might end up in a hellhole, really, because you'll really be alone, and like you'll be 40, 45, right, John? So that will be sad. And so that's the thing. The another thing, the original thing was that there is some utility in this idea, John, that this God correct. But then again, Sam Harris, people like Sam Harris could easily refute something like that, because they don't want like religion as an explanation for better behavior. But like I don't know, John, like not everyone is sophisticated enough to have this kind of their own value system. So if people believe there is some kind of character in the clouds watching them and keeping a ledger on them, then before they go out there and rape someone, they might be like, "Oh fuck, God is watching." So do we really want to do it when the God is watching? Uh,
Hmm.
so
Yeah.
so that does because it does give you and it's not like I'm not making this up. Like I have grown up in a religious environment, so I know they tell you God is watching, He's keeping track. So whenever I was doing something that was not against God, John, but just socially kind of not like smoking and stuff. So so socially that thing wouldn't be accepted uh, for like the kids. So I will like so you would be like, okay, so what if God is watching, man? So right, so that thought does come to your mind, John, when they tell you that.
Hmm.
So and then you kind of try to regulate your own behavior because hey, like it's like having cameras everywhere. So if there is God and he's watching everything from the clouds and stuff, so like there are cameras everywhere and
Yeah.
you are, but that's a big price to pay for good behavior, I guess. uh,
Yeah. Well, I think it's easier in a way to believe in a God than to keep you to do things that you're supposed to be doing. Like, okay, for myself, it's you can understand all of the negative, detrimental things that will be happen to you if you say masturbate or go through that as kind of like a continual habit. But it having that rational knowledge does not necessarily help you in restraining your own urges, and I think you can kind of see it in Sam Harris to an extent too, because he had this large uh, podcast and he was very committed to um, vegetarianism or veganism for a while, but because of his own flawed nature, he wasn't capable, and as I know, still currently incapable of fully committing himself towards the rational ideas that he came up with. And so it could be that, I mean, I don't even know if could is necessarily the right way because it seems more likely that it's in order to behave properly in the way that you know things to be good, it's better to have some sort of irrational logic behind it that is putting you forth into a more beneficial existence. Like, just as you were saying, having that idea that somebody is continually watching you, every single thing that you do, that's going to be a better capacitor for how you're going to be behaving. Whereas I don't think it's rational thought itself is as useful of a tool as that irrational idea that you can have. So in the case of like metaphorical truth versus factual truth in Brett Weinstein's case, there's instances, just as Weinstein talks about, where metaphorical truth is a stronger substance, perhaps, in certain cases. It's not a stronger substance in comprehending the world, in like breaking things down into the material realm. That these are things that require factual truths in order for us to understand it fully to and its limitations and capabilities. But I think for people, we're not exactly the same as unconscious material. It may be that we prefer to have those metaphorical truths that we, or those irrational truths that we live off of because they're more useful to us.
This is probably the most profound idea you have come up with, John. So, this idea that you probably have this irrational part of you, or I'm not sure if you call it irrational, it's kind of drive part of you.
Mm-hmm.
This drive that comes over you, whether it's
Hello? Oh, you broke up. I can't hear you. Excuse me.
sexual or
okay.
to eat the sweets and whatever.
Okay, hold on. You broke up for a second. You were talking about how there's the irrational part of you, and then you broke up. Hello? Don't think it's me. He was mentioning
John,
earlier.
can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. I was on the mobile data and somebody called me, so it got turned off.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. So you were just you were talking about the irrational part of yourself.
Right. So if you want to tame that dragon, you probably need a dragon of a similar nature, and I guess it makes sense from this brain perspective because maybe that dragon is inhabiting the irrational areas of your brain too. And it's kind of taking over them. So those other irrational parts of you kind of back off. And which does make a lot of sense because whenever I have been able to totally like tame this beast of this thing, this drive inside, right, John? So there have always been some kind of like strong. I don't know what the right word is. Remember how people would defend their religious beliefs? They would even die for it.
Mm-hmm.
Like they would end the being if they have to, but they will not kind of compromise on that belief. So, that strong. What is the word for that?
Stubbornness.
No. Yeah. So you kind of need that kind of irrationality kind of a thing where you just will not change your mind, you will not compromise and stuff. So to kind of think of how people go on this kind of hunger strikes for what they believe in.
Yeah.
And stuff. So
yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's I think I was done. I was like,
okay.
What you are talking about kind of gives me kind of it's a sad thing, but I mean, who the hell cares if it works, John? Right? So, like you have all these issues, right, that you want to fix, but you can't because you are imperfect being. You got all these different drives inside you, and I guess your observation that probably needs some irrational thing to keep them at bay. I think that might provide a solution. I guess.
Yeah. Maybe I'm kind of picking on Sam Harris too, because there's multiple instances where I see his integrity not as strong as I'm sure he'd like it to be, and the same thing can be said for myself. There's many instances where my own integrity is flawed by my own I don't know, traits that I have, and so it seems wrong to kind of specifically pick him out just because he kind of places is in a way a sort of spokesperson for rational thinking when he suffers from the same limitations that we all do. What you were saying earlier about the kind of struggle within us between the irrational and the rational, and having to kind of create a dragon within the in the same realm as the irrational. I was really fascinated by that, especially with the if you kind of think of Freud's ideas of the kind of three parts to each individual of the id, which is that irrational, animalistic type urge person that kind of relies upon his urges and instincts. And then there's the superego, which is the rational, logical intellect. And there's kind of that continual clash between the two, that the ego is kind of stuck in the middle between, or maybe the battleground for where the superego and the id will try to fight each other. And that kind of leaves you in a place where you're continually divided against yourself. And it was interesting what you were saying, using like a dragon of the same ilk, or a dragon of the same type for defeating the irrational side of yourself. That because if the animal side of yourself is continually thinking might makes right, and the intellectual side of yourself is thinking, oh, whatever is most accurate, it is the most correct. If you create a mightier being than your own animal side, that even if it's irrational, that it's funny because it kind of fits within that same sphere, because like the id doesn't necessarily listen to the superego. The superego isn't necessarily stronger than the id, so usually the id will win over, or the superego will have to figure out ways to restrain the animal side of yourself. But if you can figure out a way that to have the animal side of yourself, that irrational being, to be constrained in a way that the superego and you yourself, the ego, are happy with, then all power to you. And yeah, if that's what people are doing with their religion, then yeah, that makes sense, at least to me.
Actually, I have an example for this, John.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, I told you somebody threatened, said, "Hey, I'll beat you up" and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized if I really want to stand up for my values, I need to be physically strong.
Mm-hmm.
So I have this concept of civilian operations and military operations. So I tagged going to the gym, doing this thing right, getting the proper food as a military operation. And the reason I did that is it's crucial to like my very survival. If I really want to, intervene and do the right thing.
I see.
And
Yeah.
Yeah, so after that I've been like whenever I'm lazy and stuff, I tell myself this is a military operation. Or whenever I feel like masturbating or watching porn, I'm like, hey, this will compromise our operations that are crucial to our very survival and future. So that's kind of similar kind of based, like kind of relying upon like, hey, this is crucial to our survival. So I've been surprised how I've been able to get things right by using that trick. And I don't know for how long I can continue this. But it's been working so far, it seems.
Yeah, that's cool. For myself, I've come to a kind of conclusion where or not even really any conclusion. It was just for myself, I needed something that was a continual reminder to kind of stay strong. And so what I ended up doing is just kind of wearing a bracelet on me at all times, so that whenever I would have some sort of urges or thoughts in that kind, I would have something there as kind of something holding me back that's not even actually part of myself. It's just something that's with me always. So that's at least one way of going about it as well. But I like what you were saying about how changing your entire kind of frame of reference instead of being a civilian operation that you're within. It's putting yourself into a military operation and like bringing that fuller context for yourself.
But for that, you got to have certain degree of respect for military and what they do,
Mm-hmm.
Because like you tell yourself, hey, like you're about to watch porn, but like this is about our very survival. Like you understand that at like a deep level.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of that, your this band, I got a Jason Bourne wallpaper. So that motherfucker is crazy. So yeah, so I guess you kind of invoke this trick to kind of invoke this field, like you said, frame of mind, which is like about your very survival.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
what you
cool.
said about we are not always strong, you said that, right? We are weak sometimes. You
Yeah,
are weak
yeah,
sometimes.
definitely.
And that is the one thing I think, John, which has helped me realize Peterson's point about having a family.
Mm.
Because your friends are not always going to be there for you, and uh, you are a flawed and weak creature. You need help, you need support, and uh, uh, I'm not making an argument for having kind of a utilitarian basis for the family. I'm not doing that. Just uh, obviously, because even if I'm making that argument and do it for that reason, once you get emotionally involved, things are different, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but kind of uh, still, it's. I guess I am making a utilitarian argument then. I, uh, but it still makes a lot of sense that you can have someone like that in your life, the positive side of the family, that you can help and support each other and everything. So like uh, we only hear about like the negative parts and the broken things. So
Yeah. Well, I need to head off now finally. So this was a great conversation, though. I really enjoyed it.
yeah, I will need to note down these things about the dragons and stuff. It was cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Hey. So if anyone listening would like to join it or participate in the conversations that we have every weekend, if you go to jordanbpeterson.community, that has the links to our calendar where you can like be alerted whenever there's going to be a discussion occurring, and then maybe eventually also participate in these podcasts as well. So this next week, as I said, we're going to be discussing Jordan Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life. So you're welcome to participate in that. Thanks for listening. All right. Goodbye.